There's one assumption that completely transformed my life, and if you click off in the next 30 seconds, you're probably going to miss the one thing that would have made every single technique you've ever tried actually start working. And I'm not talking about assuming you're wealthy, or assuming you're loved, or assuming you have the perfect body. Those are all powerful. You already know that. But they're not the foundational assumption I'm talking about. This is the assumption that sits underneath everything else, the one that quietly decides whether your SATs works, whether your affirmations land, whether your visualizations actually harden into fact, or just stay daydreams. And here's where it gets crazy. I spent years studying Neville Goddard, years practicing techniques, years affirming and visualizing and living in the end. I got some results, sure, but nothing like what I have now. Everything changed the moment I made this one core assumption, and what's wild is Neville talked about this constantly. He literally screamed it in his titles, and most people completely miss it because they're too obsessed with the how-to and not the from where. So in this video, I'm going to walk you through what this assumption actually is, why it changes everything, and most importantly, how to make it so real for you that your entire life starts to reorganize around it. And somewhere in the middle of this video, I'm going to share the exact moment I realized I'd been fooling myself for years, and that story alone might trigger the same shift in you that it did in me. Because once you get this, manifestation stops being something you do. It stops being this exhausting job, and it becomes something you simply are. Stay with me all the way through, because if you miss any piece of this, especially the part where I show you how to live from this assumption, your mind is going to want to snap back to the old way of seeing reality. Let's dive in. I'm Luna, and for the past 5 years, I've been deep in the world of manifestation, Neville Goddard's teachings, and really testing, in my own life, how consciousness creates reality, not just as a cute quote, but as something you can lean on when life looks like it's falling apart. And over and over and over, I've seen the same pattern. People know all the techniques, they know SATs, they know living in the end, they know revision. They can quote Neville's lectures better than I can sometimes, but they're still stuck, still waiting and staring at the 3D, still wondering why it works for other people but not for them, and secretly thinking, maybe I'm the exception, maybe it just doesn't work for me. And I was exactly the same way until I stumbled on something Neville said in one of his lesser-known lectures. It was literally one sentence, blink and you miss it, but it stopped me cold. And I didn't get it right away either. It sat in the back of my mind like a splinter, until one night it just clicked. And when I really let it sink in, when I made it my foundational assumption about reality, everything started to flow differently. So let me ask you something, and I want you to really sit with this while we go through the video. What if the reason your manifestations haven't shown up yet has nothing to do with your technique? Nothing to do with how many affirmations you say, nothing to do with whether you visualized in first person or third person? What if it's simply because you haven't made this one core assumption real for yourself? Because if you stay with me, by the end of this video, you're going to see your entire relationship with manifestation differently, and I'm going to give you a 7-day experiment at the end that will prove this to you in your own life. So, what is this one assumption? The one Neville kept pointing to over and over, the one that quietly sits under every lecture, every story, every success? It's this: consciousness is the only reality. Now, your mind might immediately go, yeah, I've heard that. That's basic, Neville. I already know that. And if that's you, I'm going to challenge you right now. If you really, truly assumed that consciousness is the only reality, your 3D would not scare you the way it does, those messages from your SP wouldn't shake you, your bank account wouldn't dictate your nervous system, and your past wouldn't still feel like a prison. So clearly there's a gap between I've heard this and I'm actually living from this. Let me tell you a story that will show you exactly what I mean, and as I'm telling you this, see where you recognize yourself in it. About 2 years ago, I was in a really difficult financial situation. I'd been affirming abundance, visualizing money flowing to me, doing SATs every night, doing all the right things. I saw little improvements here and there, some random checks, a bit of relief, but nothing major. Nothing that matched the effort I was putting in. I was still stressed about bills, still opening my banking app with that tight feeling in my chest, still getting that pit in my stomach every time an unexpected expense came up. One night, I was rereading Neville's lecture, Consciousness is the Only Reality. And notice, he literally put the answer in the title. And he said something that hit me completely differently this time. He said, "The world is yourself pushed out. Consciousness is the one and only reality." And then he said, "This is not a theory to be believed. This is a fact to be experienced." And in that moment, it hit me like a slap. I didn't actually believe consciousness was the only reality. Not really. I believed my bank account was real. I believed the bills were real. I believed the economy was real. I believed that other people's opinions of me were real. I believed my past was real and fixed and heavy. I was giving all these external things the status of real, and then trying to use my consciousness to change them, like consciousness was a tool I picked up to fight this big, solid 3D monster outside of me. But that's completely backwards. When you truly assume that consciousness is the only reality, you realize something that, once it lands, you can never unsee. The 3D world, everything you see and touch and experience, is not the cause of anything. It's the effect. It's the shadow that consciousness casts. It's the after image, the echo. And this changes everything because you stop trying to wrestle with shadows and you start going straight to the light that's casting them. You stop trying to manipulate the outer world and you start creating from the inside out. And in a minute, I'm going to show you the exact morning practice I used to drill this into my nervous system so deeply that even when things looked bad, I couldn't take them as seriously anymore. Let me break down why this assumption is so foundational and why, once you really accept it, every other principle Neville taught becomes almost effortless. And as I do this, I want you to keep asking yourself, where am I still making the 3D more real than my consciousness? Because that's the crack where all your doubt leaks in. First, it eliminates doubt. Think about it. If consciousness is the only reality, what is there left to doubt? You're not sitting there going, will this work? Because there is no this and that anymore. There's not me here trying to push my wish out there into the world. There's just consciousness, and what you're conscious of being has to outpicture. The 3D circumstances stop being this terrifying judge of whether you're on track or not, because you know they're just an old projection, like watching a movie you filmed months ago. When I was stressed about money, I was staring at my bank account as if it was a sacred tablet of truth. I was assuming it was real, fixed, powerful, that it had authority over how I felt, what I could do, what was possible for me. But the moment I truly started playing with consciousness is the only reality, that bank account became nothing more than a temporary reflection. It lost its status. It lost its power over me. And here's what's beautiful, and honestly a little eerie. The moment something loses power over you internally, it starts to change externally, because you're no longer feeding it with your attention, your emotion, your fear, your worship. Second, it makes living in the end natural, instead of feeling like pretending. So many people tell me, living in the end feels fake. I feel like I'm lying to myself. And of course it feels fake if you still believe the 3D is the primary reality. Because you're trying to feel wealthy while looking at your empty bank account, you're trying to feel loved while looking at your empty bed, and there's this constant tug of war between what you're seeing and what you're imagining. But when you truly assume consciousness is the only reality, living in the end isn't fake at all. In fact, it's the only thing that's actually real. The empty bank account is the lie. The state of I am abundant is the truth. The lonely bed is the lie. The state of I am loved is the reality. After I had that realization, I started this super simple practice every morning that, I swear, rewired my entire relationship with the world. I would sit with my coffee and instead of jumping straight into affirmations, I would just remind myself, out loud sometimes, consciousness is the only reality. Everything I'll experience today is just my consciousness pushed out. My bank account is consciousness. My relationships are consciousness. My health is consciousness. The entire world is just my inner state externalized. And then I'd ask myself one question that you can start asking yourself from today. What state of consciousness do I want to be in today? And I would choose abundance. But here's the key. Not because I was trying to manifest money and then check if it worked, but because I wanted to dwell in the state of abundance for its own sake. Because that state is the reality, The money is just the shadow it casts. Within about 2 weeks of doing this, I noticed something insane. My thoughts about money had changed on autopilot. I wasn't forcing positive thoughts. I just wasn't worried anymore. I knew my state of consciousness was the only thing creating my reality, and I was in the state of abundance, so the 3D had no choice but to eventually conform. And sure enough, within a month, I got an unexpected opportunity that doubled my income. But listen closely. That was almost like a side effect. It wasn't, I did this to get that. It was, I became this, so that had to show up. Third, it puts you completely back in power, and this is the part that might blow your mind if you really let it in. When you assume consciousness is the only reality, you realize that nothing outside of you has any power over your experience. Nothing. Not your past, not your childhood, not your ex, not the economy, not your boss, not your current diagnosis, not your age, nothing. All of those things are just expressions of consciousness. They are not causes, they are effects. They are the movie, not the projector. Neville talks about this in The Pearl of Great Price. He says, you give up every other belief system, every other savior, every other cause, and you buy this one pearl. You are the operant power. Consciousness is the one and only reality. When I really got this, it was like someone had taken a 100-pound backpack off my shoulders. I realized how much time I had spent blaming my past, blaming other people, blaming circumstances, giving them all this authority they never actually had. The moment I assumed consciousness is the only reality, all of that collapsed because I saw that I was the one assigning reality. I was the one crowning things as real or powerful with my attention. And in just a minute, I'm going to show you how to start catching yourself in real time when you're doing that. Because if you only understand this intellectually, your old patterns will keep sneaking back in through the side door. Now, this is where most people trip up. They hear consciousness is the only reality, and they go, okay, cool, I believe that. But believing it in your head and actually assuming it as the ground you stand on are two completely different worlds. So how do you make this assumption real for you? How do you shift from interesting idea to this is just how I see life now? I'm going to walk you through the exact process that worked for me and for so many people I've shared this with, and I want you to listen for the one step that feels a little uncomfortable, because that's probably the one your ego has been avoiding. Step 1 is, start observing your 3D world as evidence of consciousness, not as reality. This is the first and most important step, because if you don't do this, you'll keep falling back into reacting to conditions like there's something happening to you. For 1 week, I made it my job to look at everything in my life and ask, what state of consciousness created this? My messy apartment? That came from a state of overwhelm and neglect and lack of self-worth. My strained relationship with my sister? That came from a state of feeling unheard, defensive, undervalued. My financial struggle? That came from a state of lack and fear, and there's never enough. And this wasn't about beating myself up. It was actually the opposite. It was like, oh, this isn't random. This isn't punishment. This is cause and effect. This is my consciousness doing what it does. It was about recognizing that my 3D world wasn't happening to me. It was happening from me. Once I started seeing this, something clicked. If my consciousness created all of this, then my consciousness can create something completely different. That's what Neville meant when he said, the world is yourself pushed out. He wasn't being poetic. He was being literal. Everything you see is your consciousness externalized. So start playing with this today. Look at the one area of your life that bothers you the most, and instead of asking, why is this happening to me? Ask, what would I have to be assuming about myself or about life for this to make sense? Don't judge, just observe, because awareness is the first step to changing state. Step 2 is, start living from the assumption, not towards it. This is subtle, but crazy powerful. Most people live as if the 3D is real, and consciousness is something they hope will eventually prove itself. So they think, once I manifest the money, then I'll really believe consciousness creates reality. Or, once my SP shows up, then I'll know this works. That's totally backwards. You don't manifest to prove consciousness works. You assume consciousness is the only reality, and manifestation becomes a non-issue. When I was working on my financial situation, I caught myself in this exact trap. I was basically saying, okay, I'm going to live in the end of having money, and when the money shows up, that will be my proof. But in that mindset, I was still making the 3D more real than consciousness. I was still waiting for the 3D to be the final authority. One day, I flipped it. I literally said to myself out loud, no, consciousness is the only reality. That's the fact. The money in my account is just consciousness. The lack is just consciousness. So I'm going to be conscious of abundance right now, not to get money, but because that is the reality I choose to live in. The money will just be the echo of that choice. Feel the difference in that. In the first scenario, I'm trying to use consciousness to change a real world. In the second, I'm recognizing consciousness as the only real thing and letting the world be whatever old echo it is while it catches up. When you live from this assumption, you stop needing the 3D to confirm anything. You stop checking. You stop looking for signs to see if it's working. You stop asking, where is it? Because you genuinely know that what you're conscious of is your reality now, and the 3D is just the delayed mirror. Step 3 is, use revision to rewire your relationship with the past itself. One of the biggest blocks to fully assuming consciousness is the only reality is this heavy, unquestioned belief in the past as something solid and unchangeable. We think, well, that happened, it's real, I can't touch that, and then we drag that story into every present moment. Neville gave us revision not just to fix embarrassing moments, but to break the spell of the past. I started revising my day every night, like he suggests, but I went a bit broader. Instead of just changing one conversation, I would revise the whole flavor of the day. So if I'd had a day where I'd felt stressed and overwhelmed, instead of falling asleep in that state, I'd imagine the day as if I had moved through it, from calm, power, and confidence. I would replay myself waking up peaceful, handling the hardest thing that happened with ease, going to bed feeling satisfied and taken care of. What I was really doing was training my consciousness to see that even the past is malleable, that what already happened is just a story in consciousness now, and stories can shift. After a few weeks of this, I noticed something wild. I had stopped using my past as an excuse. I wasn't thinking, I can't be rich because of what happened to me, or I'm broken because of how I grew up. The past had lost its grip, because if consciousness is the only reality, then the past is just another pattern in consciousness, and you can choose a different pattern. You can choose to be someone who has always been supported, always been the lucky one, always been loved, always been more powerful than they realized. And when you choose that in consciousness, your future has to rearrange to match it. Step 4 is, practice pure I am awareness throughout your day. This is the practice that really sealed everything for me. Neville always said, I am is God, that I am is the creative power itself. So I started doing something incredibly simple. Multiple times a day, I would just pause and feel, I am, not I am rich, or I am loved. At first, just, I exist, I am aware, I am. In that moment, I wasn't a person with problems. I wasn't my bank balance. I wasn't my relationship status. I wasn't my body. I was just pure awareness. And from that place, I could then choose, calmly, I am abundant. I am loved. I am healthy. Not as affirmations I was desperately repeating, but as choices about what I wanted to be conscious of now. If you do nothing else from this video, do this. Set a timer on your phone a few times a day, and when it goes off, stop. Drop into that feeling of, I am. Feel the silent awareness that's always been there, even when your life was a mess. And then from that place, decide, who am I being right now? This alone will start to make consciousness is the only reality move from your head into your bones. Now let's talk about what actually changes when you make this shift. Because this is not just about manifesting a car or a text. This is about your entire experience of life, and I want you to listen for the thing that you secretly crave the most. Is it safety, freedom, love, certainty? Because this assumption gives you that at the root. First, you stop being afraid of circumstances. Before I really assumed consciousness is the only reality, I lived in constant low-key fear of what if? What if I lose the money? What if I get sick? What if they leave? What if things go wrong? What if this falls apart? Every circumstance felt like this big, looming threat. But when you really get that circumstances are not causes, they're just old effects, old projections, they lose their power to scare you. You see a bill, and instead of, oh my God, it's, this is just an echo of an old state. I know what's actually real. A few months after I made this shift, I got a health scare. Some test results came back, and the doctor looked concerned, wanted to run more tests. Now, the old me would have spiraled, Googled symptoms at 2 a.m., played out worst-case scenarios in my mind. But this time, it was like watching an old reflex that just didn't have any real pull. I literally looked at the papers and thought, this is just consciousness. This is just a snapshot of an old assumption. I'm going to be conscious of perfect health now and let this catch up. And I didn't do it from fear. I didn't frantically affirm. I did it from this calm, grounded, knowing that the only thing that has ever created anything in my life is state. 2 weeks later, follow-up tests, everything was completely normal. The doctor was confused. I wasn't. I knew something in me had shifted, and the body, being part of the 3D, had no choice but to mirror it. Second, you become emotionally free in a way that's hard to even describe until you start tasting it. When you think circumstances are real and your consciousness is just reacting to them, you're on this emotional roller coaster all the time. Something good happens, you're up. Something bad happens, you're down. You're constantly checking the 3D to know how to feel. When you flip it and really assume consciousness is the only reality, you realize it's the other way around. Your emotional state is the cause and the circumstances are the response. So, you start choosing your state on purpose, not by forcing yourself to be positive, but by understanding that your state is the only place your real power lives. I started doing this thing where, anytime I felt myself reacting, I would pause and say, sometimes out loud, okay, this circumstance is just consciousness pushed out. It has no power. My reaction right now is me stepping into a state. So what state do I want to live in? And then I'd choose peace or security or love, and I'd sit in it even if nothing outside had changed yet. And you know what happened? My outer life started to feel less chaotic even before anything dramatic happened, because I wasn't letting it dictate how I felt anymore. And then, slowly but surely, things rearranged to match that calmer, more powerful state. Third, manifestation becomes effortless. And I know that sounds like a cliche, but listen to how it actually works. When you stop using techniques as a way to fight the 3D, and you simply assume consciousness is the only reality, manifestation becomes like breathing. Like you think it, you feel it, and the world reshuffles. Not because you're straining, but because that's what it's always been doing. For example, I'd been trying to manifest a specific relationship for months. I was doing SATs, scripting, affirming, checking their socials, you know the drill. I was seeing little bits of movement, but it felt like this heavy chore. I was constantly thinking, am I doing enough? Am I doing it right? Should I visualize more? After this shift, I realized, wait, if consciousness is the only reality, then me being conscious of being in a loving relationship is the thing, not what they're doing or not doing out there. So I dropped all the techniques, not out of frustration, but out of clarity. I just started living my life as if I was already in a beautiful, secure relationship. I moved from that state, I answered texts from that state, I went to sleep from that state, not to get anything, just because that's who I was being. Within 3 weeks, that person reached out in a completely new energy. We reconnected in this really natural way, and within 2 months, the 3D relationship matched the state I'd been walking in. And by the time it showed up, here's the funny part. I wasn't desperate anymore, because I'd already been living in the feeling of, I am loved. The 3D was just like, oh, of course, that makes sense. Fourth, you start seeing synchronicities everywhere, and it becomes this constant feedback loop that keeps strengthening your assumption. You think of someone, they call, you wrestle with an idea, the exact answer pops up in a video or a book that randomly crosses your path. You need something. It appears in a way you couldn't have planned. One day, I was really chewing on a particular Neville concept. I was like, I kind of get this intellectually, but something's not landing. And I just mentally said, I want to see this clearly. Later that day, scrolling through social media, someone I hadn't seen post in months shared a quote from that exact lecture, with an explanation that said the one phrase I needed to hear. In the old days, I would have said, wow, what a coincidence. Now, I just smiled, because there are no coincidences if consciousness is the only reality. It was my own consciousness answering itself through the easiest channel available. The more you notice this, the more you realize, oh, I really am living in my own consciousness. And that realization makes it even easier to assume this as your baseline. Now I want to go a layer deeper, because when you really fully assume consciousness is the only reality, it doesn't just change what you manifest, it changes who you think you are. And this is where things can get a little trippy in the best way possible. You start to realize you're not a separate little self trying to bend reality, you are reality bending itself. Neville hinted at this so many times in his later lectures. He would say things like, you are God dreaming you are human, or consciousness is the only reality, and you are that consciousness. That's not just pretty language, that's literal. I had this experience one day in meditation, and I'm sharing this not so you chase experiences, but so you see where this can lead. I was resting in that simple, I am awareness, and suddenly it was like the sense of me trying to manifest just dropped away. I didn't feel like a person inside a body imagining things out there. I just felt like consciousness, aware of itself, selecting experiences. There was no gap between me and the universe. It was all the same thing. In that moment, all the pressure to do it right evaporated because I saw there was never anyone separate who had to force anything. There was just consciousness deciding, I am this, and reality saying, okay. Another huge implication is Neville's line, everyone is you pushed out, which so many people misunderstand and either get freaked out by or use in a weird way. It doesn't mean other people don't exist or don't have inner lives. It means you never experience anyone except through your consciousness of them. For years, I had a really difficult relationship with my father. Same arguments, same triggers, like we were reading from a script we hated but couldn't stop acting out. I saw him as critical, dismissive, emotionally unavailable, and surprise, that's exactly how he kept showing up. When I really leaned into consciousness is the only reality, I saw, painfully, that I was clinging to a very old, very wounded consciousness of him. I was not meeting who he was now. I was meeting my assumption about him over and over. So I started changing my consciousness of him. In imagination, I saw him as warm, proud of me, supportive, interested in my life. I revised old memories where he'd hurt me and replayed them as if he had comforted me instead, not because I was trying to control him, but because I refused to keep carrying that old state in my own consciousness. Within weeks, he started acting differently. He called more, he softened. One day he apologized for specific things he'd done years ago that we had never spoken about. Did I make him do that? No. I changed the only thing I ever really can change. My consciousness of him. The 3D relationship simply rearranged to match that. This is true for everyone in your life. Partners, bosses, friends, enemies. If consciousness is the only reality, then your experience of them has to change when your inner conception changes. And lastly, you stop seeing time as this linear, oppressive thing you're trapped inside of. If consciousness is the only reality, then past, present, and future are just ways we describe different arrangements of consciousness, but they all exist now, in the only place anything has ever existed, your awareness. Neville talked about this as the fourth dimension, where every possible state already exists, and your consciousness is like a selector. You're not dragging yourself towards a future, you're shifting into a state that already is. So instead of thinking, one day in the future I'll manifest this, you start to play with, this already exists in consciousness. Right now, somewhere in the field, there is a version of me for whom this is normal, this is done, this is boring. I'm just aligning my awareness with that version. When you do that, something shifts. The strain drops, because you're no longer waiting for something that may or may not come. You're claiming what already is true in the only place that matters, within. And the 3D, again, simply catches up. So let's bring this all the way down into your everyday life, because this can't just be a nice idea you think about while you watch this video and then forget the second you see a bill or you don't get a text. You want this to be your baseline, your default. Here's how I actually live from this assumption day to day, and you can start this as soon as tomorrow morning. When I wake up, before I check my phone, before I remember who I'm supposed to be and what problems I'm supposed to have, I give myself a few minutes to anchor in this truth. I'll literally lie there and say, I am consciousness. Consciousness is the only reality. Everything I experience today will be my consciousness pushed out. I am the operant power. Then I choose a state. Not a specific thing I want, a state. Abundance, love, peace, confidence, security, whatever I want to live in that day. And instead of begging the universe for things, I just claim, this is who I am now, and I get up and move from that. Throughout the day, every time I catch myself reacting to something, a message, a number in my bank account, someone's tone of voice, I use it as a reminder instead of a trigger. I'll pause and think, okay, this is just consciousness in form. This is the shadow, not the source. My reaction right now is me selecting a state. Do I really want to select fear? Do I really want to select lack? Or do I want to choose something else? And I redirect. Sometimes it takes 30 seconds, sometimes it takes a few minutes, but each time I do that, I'm reinforcing the habit of seeing consciousness as primary. At night, before I fall asleep, I do a very gentle revision. I don't make it a big complicated ritual. I just look back over the day and, in imagination, I replay it from the state I wish I had been in. If I was stressed, I replay myself as calm. If I felt rejected, I replay myself as confident and secure. If I felt lack, I replay myself as abundant and taken care of. Then I fall asleep in that revised feeling. Over time, these little choices add up. You start spending more time in chosen states than in automatic ones, and your 3D has no choice but to start mirroring that, because again, consciousness is the only reality. The rest is just echo. So here's what I want you to really walk away with from this video. You don't have a manifestation problem. You don't have a my SP is stubborn problem. You don't have a maybe I'm blocked problem. You have an assumption problem. As long as you secretly assume the 3D is more real than your consciousness, you will always feel like you're fighting, like you're trying to push a boulder uphill with your mind. The moment you truly assume that consciousness is the only reality, not as a nice belief, but as the fundamental truth of your existence, everything flips. Your circumstances lose their power over you. Your past stops dictating who you can be. Your future stops being this scary unknown and becomes something you're literally selecting right now, moment by moment, in consciousness. Manifestation stops being this hard thing you're trying to do and becomes the most natural thing in the world because you realize you've been manifesting your whole life. You just weren't doing it deliberately. This is the one assumption that changes everything, because once you really take it on, you discover you're not a limited human begging a universe outside of you. You are consciousness itself, the operant power, creating your experience every second. And from that realization, honestly, anything is possible. So here's my challenge to you, and this is your open loop for the next 7 days. Live as if consciousness is the only reality for 1 week, just 7 days. Every morning, remind yourself of this truth. Throughout your day, catch yourself whenever you make a circumstance realer than your state, and gently pull your power back. Every evening, revise your day from the state you actually want to live in. Do it fully, not half-heartedly, and watch what happens. Notice the little shifts, the synchronicities, the emotional changes, even if the 3D doesn't flip overnight, because those are your first signs that your root assumption is changing. If this video resonated with you, if something in you went, oh my God, this is what I've been missing, make sure you drop a comment below and tell me, honestly, what was the one line or the one story that hit you the hardest, the one that made you see your life differently? I read every single comment, and I love seeing how this lands for you.